It was supposed to be perfect, a celebration of our 3-year anniversary on a paradise island. Everything had been meticulously planned: the private villa, the secluded beach, the candlelit dinner under the stars. All of it was meant to be a testament to how far we'd come together. Mary had been the love of my life, and I wanted this trip to rekindle the passion that had started to wane. But it wasn't just the fire in our relationship that needed to be reignited. Something much darker lurked beneath the surface, something I was about to discover. The night had started off wonderfully. We'd laughed, shared memories, and even danced on the soft sand as the waves gently lapped at our feet. But as the evening wore on, I noticed Mary becoming distant, her laughter a little too forced, her smiles not quite reaching her eyes. I chalked it up to tiredness, or maybe the effect of the wine. But then, she dropped the bombshell that shattered everything. "Mark," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." I turned to her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" I asked, my mind already racing with 1,000 possibilities. None of them good. "There's an old man staying in the villa next to ours. He's dying, Mark. He only has a few days left, and he's all alone except for his daughter. He asked if he could spend one last night with a woman. Out of pity, I told him I would." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. "You're kidding, right?" I finally said, the disbelief choking my words. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, I'm serious. He's all alone, Mark. I felt so sorry for him." "You felt sorry for him," I repeated, incredulous. "And you think that's a reason to sleep with him?" "It's not just about that," she insisted, her voice trembling. "He's dying. He just wants to feel loved one last time. Please try to understand." "Understand," I echoed, my anger rising. "You want me to understand that you're going to sleep with another man, on our anniversary no less, because you feel sorry for him. This will ruin our marriage, Mary." She looked at me with a resolve that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "I've made up my mind, Mark. I'm going to do it." In a rage, I turned away from her, the night suddenly feeling suffocating. "You've made up your mind," I spat out. "Then there's nothing left to discuss." She reached out, trying to touch me, but I pulled away. "Mark, please." "Don't," I said coldly. "Just don't." She left the villa shortly after, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a rage that I couldn't contain. The hours crawled by, each minute more agonizing than the last, as I imagined what she was doing with him, how she could betray me like this. But the night had more in store for me than just the bitter taste of betrayal. As I sat there, fuming, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a young woman standing there, her face strikingly beautiful, but her eyes filled with a kind of predatory intent that made my skin crawl. "I'm his daughter," she said with a sly smile. "I thought you might need some company tonight, too." I slammed the door in her face, disgusted by the implication. But it wasn't long before the truth unraveled in the most horrifying way. The next morning, when Mary returned, her face pale and tear-streaked, she could barely look me in the eye. "Mark," she sobbed, "I'm sorry. I was out of my mind." But it was too late. The truth had already clawed its way into my heart, tearing apart everything we had built together. It was over. Mary's words echoed in my mind, each one a dagger that twisted deeper into my gut. I was out of my mind. I stared at her, barely able to keep my emotions in check, as she stood there in the early morning light, looking like a shadow of the woman I once loved. "What happened, Mary?" I demanded, my voice cold and distant. "Why are you sorry now? You made your choice." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for forgiveness, but I couldn't find any left to give. "I didn't know what I was doing, Mark. It was like I was possessed. I thought I was helping, but it wasn't right. I know that now." My hands balled into fists as I fought the urge to lash out, to scream at her for what she'd done. "And what exactly did you do?" I asked, my tone flat. She hesitated, then broke down into tears, sinking to her knees on the cold tile floor. "I went to him," she whispered between sobs. "We talked, and he told me about his life, how lonely he was, how he regretted not finding love. And then he kissed me, and I didn't stop him. I felt sick. My stomach churned, and bile rose in my throat. I had imagined this moment over and over again in the dark hours of the night, but hearing it from her own lips was far worse than any nightmare. "I didn't sleep with him, Mark. I swear it never went that far," she cried, looking up at me with desperation. "But I let him kiss me, and I stayed the night in his bed. I don't know why. I just felt like I owed him something, like I needed to make him happy before he died. I should have felt relief that she claimed not to have slept with him, but I didn't. The damage was already done. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage was shattered, and nothing she said could repair it." "And what about his daughter?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "She tried to seduce me, you know. Is that part of the plan, too?" A little tit-for-tat Mary's face twisted in confusion. "What? No, that's not... Mark, I had no idea she would..." "Of course you didn't," I interrupted, my anger flaring up again. "Just like you didn't know what you were doing when you left me here alone to play the martyr for a dying old man." Her shoulders slumped, and she looked utterly defeated. "I was wrong, Mark. I see that now. I should never have gone to him. I should have stayed with you, with us. Please, please believe me. I just want to make this right." I stared at her for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us heavy with all the words we couldn't say. Finally, I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her anymore. "There's no making this right, Mary," I said quietly. "You can't undo what's been done. Our marriage, it's over." She let out a strangled cry, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Instead, I walked out of the villa, leaving her there on the floor, consumed by her own regret. As I stepped out into the blinding sunlight, I realized that this paradise island had become a prison, a place where the life I once knew had died alongside whatever love I had left for my wife. I needed to get away, to clear my head, but no matter where I went, the reality of what had happened would follow me. I couldn't run from it, just as I couldn't run from the truth that the woman I loved was no longer the woman I married. The hours passed in a blur as I wandered aimlessly around the island, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, hurt, and betrayal. Every beautiful sight, every sound of the waves crashing on the shore, felt like a mockery of the happiness I'd once envisioned for this trip. I couldn't stop thinking about Mary's tear-streaked face, her desperate apologies, her insistence that it hadn't gone all the way. But what did it matter? She had made a choice, and that choice had destroyed us. I found myself on a secluded beach, far from the resort, where the sand was untouched by footprints, and the water was a deeper, more ominous shade of blue. I sat down, the sand cool beneath me, and stared out at the horizon, trying to find some semblance of peace in the rhythmic motion of the waves. But peace was elusive, and the storm inside me only grew stronger. I thought about the old man. I had never met him, but he had become the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong, a symbol of the madness that had taken over my life. I hated him for what he represented, for the way he had manipulated Mary's compassion, for the way he had shattered my world without even knowing me. But most of all, I hated that I couldn't confront him, couldn't demand answers or retribution. He was dying, and soon he would be gone, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my marriage. The sun was setting by the time I made my way back to the villa. I dreaded returning, but there was nowhere else to go. When I walked through the door, I found Mary sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of fear and hope, as if she was clinging to the possibility that I might still forgive her. But forgiveness wasn't something I could offer. Not now. Maybe not ever. "We need to talk," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She nodded silently, wiping away the tears that had started to fall again. "I know," she whispered. I sat down in the chair opposite her, keeping as much distance between us as possible. "I need to understand why," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Why did you do it, Mary? What were you thinking?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. "I don't know, Mark," she confessed. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I was overwhelmed by his story, by the sadness in his eyes. He looked so lost, so alone, and I thought I could make a difference, even if just for one night." "But at what cost?" I demanded, the anger I'd been holding back finally breaking through. "You threw away everything we had for what, to make yourself feel better, to be some kind of savior." She flinched at my words, but didn't look away. "I know it was selfish," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I was wrong, Mark. I see that now. But I wasn't trying to hurt you. I lost myself in the moment and I couldn't see past his pain." I shook my head, disbelief and frustration coursing through me. "You lost yourself in the moment," I repeated bitterly. "And what about me, Mary? What about us? Did you even think about what this would do to our marriage?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "I can't do this," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I can't sit here and pretend that everything's going to be okay. You've crossed a line, Mary, and I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." "Mark, please," she pleaded, standing up and reaching out to me, but I stepped back, putting even more distance between us. "No," I said firmly. "Don't touch me. Don't try to fix this. You made your decision and now we both have to live with it." Tears streamed down her face as she realized the finality of my words. "But I love you," she cried. "I love you, Mark. Doesn't that count for anything?" I wanted to say that it did, that love could conquer anything, that we could somehow find our way back to each other. But the truth was, love wasn't enough. Not anymore. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Maybe it would have once. But now, I just don't know." She collapsed back onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I turned away, walking out of the room and leaving her there, her cries echoing in the emptiness of the villa. I wandered the halls aimlessly, feeling like a stranger in a place that was supposed to be a paradise. Every step I took, every breath I drew, felt like it was pulling me further away from the life I had known. And deep down, I knew that this was just the beginning. The real pain was yet to come. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and pain. Mary and I barely spoke, each of us trapped in our own private hell. The villa that had once seemed like a romantic retreat now felt like a prison, its luxurious surroundings a cruel mockery of the shattered state of our marriage. I spent most of my time outside, wandering the island alone, trying to make sense of what had happened. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I avoided Mary as much as I could, the sight of her only reminding me of the betrayal I couldn't erase. I could feel her presence everywhere, though. Every room carried the weight of her, every corner a reminder of what we had lost. It was suffocating, and yet I couldn't leave. Not yet. One evening, after hours of walking along the deserted shoreline, I returned to the villa to find her sitting on the balcony, staring out at the ocean. She looked small, fragile, her hair tousled by the wind, and for a moment I almost felt a pang of sympathy. But then the memory of her words, her confession, slammed into me like a wave, and the sympathy evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard anger that had become my constant companion. She didn't notice me at first, lost in her thoughts. But when I stepped onto the balcony, she turned, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "Don't," I said, my voice flat. "Just don't." She looked down, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Mark, we can't go on like this," she whispered. "We can't keep avoiding each other. We need to talk." I leaned against the railing, staring out at the horizon. "What's there to talk about, Mary?" "You made your choice. There's nothing left to say." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "But there is. I can't stand the silence between us. It's killing me. Please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my anger flaring again. "That you felt sorry for some dying old man, so you decided to throw away our marriage, or that you didn't even have the decency to tell me until it was too late." "I know I was wrong," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know I hurt you. But Mark, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was caught up in the moment, in his pain, and I just wanted to help." "Help?" I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "You wanted to help Mary. Do you even hear yourself? You let some stranger's sob story convince you to betray everything we had. How do you think that makes me feel? What am I supposed to do with that?" She didn't have an answer. Instead, she just stared at me, her eyes pleading, as if she could will me to understand, to forgive. But I couldn't. I didn't have it in me. "I thought I knew you," I said, my voice hollow. "I thought we had something real, something that could survive anything. But I guess I was wrong." "Mark, please," she begged, tears spilling down her cheeks again. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. What I did, it was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But it doesn't change how I feel about you." "But it changes how I feel about you," I replied, the words cutting through the air like a knife. "It changes everything." She flinched as if I had slapped her, her face crumpling with the weight of my words. For a long moment, we just stood there, the silence between us louder than any argument. I could feel the finality of it settling in, the realization that we had reached a point of no return. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't," I said simply. "Some things can't be fixed." She nodded slowly, as if she had known all along that this was where we were headed. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked out at the darkening sky, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting the world into shadow. "We go home," I said finally, "and we figure out what comes next. But whatever it is, it won't be the same." She bit her lip, nodding again, her eyes filled with despair. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered. "For everything." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked back inside, leaving her alone on the balcony, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like the night sky above. I knew she was sorry. I knew she was hurting. But the damage was done, and there was no going back. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I realized that the woman I had married was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had betrayed me in a way that I could never have imagined. The future that we had once planned together was now nothing more than a shattered dream, and I was left to pick up the pieces, alone. The flight back home was the longest of my life. Mary and I barely spoke, the silence between us suffocating, heavy with all the unspoken words, all the pain that neither of us knew how to express. I stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by, trying to imagine what life would be like now, what the hell we were supposed to do next. Mary kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red from crying. She didn't even bother trying to reach out to me this time. I think she knew it would only make things worse. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal, so I didn't. I just kept my gaze fixed on the horizon, counting down the hours until we landed. When we finally arrived home, it felt like stepping into a different world. The house that had once been our sanctuary, our refuge, now felt foreign, like a place where strangers lived. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. There was a tension in the air, a palpable sense of dread that seemed to cling to every corner, every shadow. Mary went straight to our bedroom, probably to hide from me, while I lingered in the living room, trying to make sense of it all. I walked around aimlessly, my fingers trailing over the familiar furniture, the framed photos of us on the walls, smiling, happy, blissfully unaware of what was to come. Those images felt like they belonged to a different life, a life that had ended the moment Mary made her fateful decision. I ended up in the kitchen, pouring myself a drink. I didn't even want it, but it was something to do, something to numb the pain that gnawed at me from the inside. As I took a sip, the bitter liquid burning its way down my throat, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Mary. "Mark," she said softly, her voice hesitant. I didn't respond, just kept staring into the amber depths of my glass. "Please," she continued, stepping closer. "Can we just talk? Can we try to figure this out?" I finally turned to face her, my eyes cold. "Figure what out, Mary? What's there to figure out? You made your choice. You threw everything away for some dying old man, and now you want to talk." She flinched but didn't back down. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up, but I don't want this to be the end. I love you, Mark. I always have." "Love." I spat out the word like it was poison. "You think this is love? What you did? That's not love, Mary. That's betrayal. That's the kind of thing that destroys everything." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I was stupid, Mark. I know that. I wasn't thinking. I was caught up in the moment, and I made a terrible mistake. But I can't undo it. All I can do is try to make it right. Try to make you see that I'm still the same person who loves you, who wants to be with you." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You're not the same person, Mary. You're not the woman I married. That woman wouldn't have done this. That woman would have known what was at stake, and she would have protected what we had. But you're a stranger to me now." She sobbed, the sound tearing at my heart, but I refused to let it show. I couldn't afford to be weak, not now. "Mark, please," she begged, her voice desperate. "We can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can talk. We can do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. Don't throw everything away because of one mistake." "One mistake," I repeated, incredulous. "That's what you think this is. Just one mistake, Mary. You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed our marriage. You destroyed our trust. And once that's gone, what's left?" She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't find it in myself to give her any hope. "Mark, I don't know what to say. I just know that I don't want to lose you." I drained the rest of my drink and set the glass down on the counter, the sound echoing in the silence. "Maybe you should have thought of that before you spent the night with another man." The words hung in the air between us, harsh and unforgiving. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, her face crumpling as the tears flowed freely. "I think you should go," I said, my voice flat. "What?" She looked at me, confused, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. "I think you should leave," I repeated, my tone harder now. "We both need some space. I need to figure out what comes next, and I can't do that with you here." Her expression was one of pure heartbreak, but she didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, the reality of what I was saying sinking in. "Okay," she whispered, "if that's what you want." "It's what I need," I said, unable to meet her gaze. She stood there for a moment longer, as if hoping I might change my mind, but when it became clear that I wouldn't, She turned and walked out of the kitchen. I listened as she moved around the house, gathering a few things, and then I heard the front door open and close behind her. I was alone again, and for the first time in my life, the silence felt like a curse. I sank down into one of the chairs, my head in my hands, trying to block out the image of her leaving, trying to ignore the voice in my head that whispered that maybe, just maybe, I had made the wrong choice. But it was too late for regrets. I had made my decision, just as she had made hers, and now we would both have to live with the consequences. The days that followed Mary's departure were a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I threw myself into anything that could keep my mind occupied, cleaning, fixing things that didn't need fixing, spending hours at work, even though there was nothing there that required my attention. Anything to avoid thinking about what had happened, to avoid feeling the gaping hole that Mary had left behind. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the memories kept creeping back. I'd find myself staring at the photo of us on our wedding day, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Or I'd catch a whiff of her perfume lingering in the bedroom, and the pain would come rushing back, sharp and unrelenting. One night, after downing more drinks than I cared to count, I found myself on the couch, surrounded by empty bottles and the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. I stared at the television, the sound turned off, the images flickering by without meaning. In the silence, my thoughts grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found her name. My thumb hovered over the call button for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to hear her voice, to feel some connection to the life we had shared. But another part of me, the part that still burned with anger and betrayal, wanted to stay as far away from her as possible. In the end, I didn't call. Instead, I threw the phone onto the couch and buried my face in my hands, trying to shut out the pain, the memories, the constant questioning of what I could have done differently. But there were no answers, only the cold, hard truth that our marriage had been shattered, and there was no going back. The days turned into weeks, each one blending into the next, until I barely recognized myself in the mirror. I had lost weight, my face was gaunt, and there was a hollow look in my eyes that I couldn't shake. I started avoiding friends, making excuses when they called, not wanting to explain what had happened or why Mary wasn't around anymore. I wasn't ready to face their pity, their judgment, or worse, their advice. But as much as I tried to isolate myself, life had a way of intruding. One evening, after another long day at work, I came home to find a letter waiting for me. The sight of Mary's handwriting on the envelope made my heart skip a beat, and for a moment I considered throwing it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me, and with trembling hands, I tore it open. The letter was short, just a few lines, but every word felt like a dagger to my heart. Mark, I've been thinking about us, about what happened and where we go from here. I know I hurt you in a way that can't be undone, and I don't blame you for needing space, but I miss you. I miss us. I know things will never be the same, but I still believe we can find a way forward, together. Please, let's talk. Let's try to figure this out. I don't want to lose you. With all my love, Mary. I read the letter over and over, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to salvage what was left of our marriage. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, couldn't see how it was possible. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the coffee table, sitting back on the couch as I tried to process everything. I thought about all the times we had laughed together, all the moments we had shared, and how, despite everything, a part of me still loved her. But then I remembered the betrayal, the way she had looked at me when she told me what she had done, and the anger came rushing back. Could I forgive her? Could I let go of the pain and try to rebuild what we had lost? Or was it too late, the damage too great to ever be repaired? I didn't know the answer, and the uncertainty gnawed at me, keeping me awake long into the night. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this, caught between hope and despair, unable to move forward or let go. I needed to see her, to talk to her, to confront the reality of our situation, whatever that might be. I needed to know if there was anything left worth saving. With a heavy heart, I picked up the phone and called her. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice tentative, almost afraid. "Mark," she said softly. "It's me," I replied, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "We need to talk." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her holding her breath on the other end. "Okay," she finally said. "When?" "Tonight," I said, not giving myself time to second-guess the decision. "I'll come over after work." "Okay," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll be here." We hung up without saying anything more, the weight of what was to come pressing down on both of us. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, barely able to focus on anything, my thoughts consumed by the conversation we were about to have. That evening, I drove to the small apartment she had rented after she left, my heart pounding in my chest the whole way. As I pulled into the parking lot, I sat in the car for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Finally, with a deep breath, I got out and walked to her door. It opened almost as soon as I knocked, and there she was, standing before me, looking just as fragile and lost as she had the day she left. "Mark," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears the moment she saw me. "Mary," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. For a moment we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say, the air between us heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, she stepped aside, and I walked in, feeling the weight of the decision I had to make, pressing down on me with every step. This was it, the moment of truth. The moment that would decide whether we would find a way to rebuild our lives together, or whether this would be the final chapter of our story. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in the small apartment that felt as foreign as the silence between us. Mary stood a few feet away, her hands wringing nervously in front of her, eyes flickering between hope and fear. The air was thick with tension, so palpable that it almost made it hard to breathe. I took in the surroundings, minimalistic and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to the home we'd built together. It struck me then just how separate our lives had become in such a short time. The life we had shared seemed distant, like something from a different era, a memory tainted by the choices we both made. "Do you want something to drink?" she offered, her voice breaking the silence, though it was barely above a whisper. "No, I'm fine," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, though my emotions were anything but. I could see the tension in her posture, the way she struggled to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But there was nothing normal about this, nothing at all. We stood there awkwardly, neither of us knowing how to start. The words we needed to say were so monumental, so loaded, that it felt impossible to get them out. Finally, I took a deep breath and decided to plunge into the heart of the matter. "I got your letter," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Mary's eyes softened, a flicker of hope brightening her expression. "I didn't know if you would read it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was afraid you might just throw it away. I've been thinking about us, about what happened and where we go from here. I know I hurt you in a way that can't be undone, and I don't blame you for needing space. But I miss you. I miss us. I know things will never be the same, but I still believe we can find a way forward, together. Please, let's talk. Let's try to figure this out. I don't want to lose you. With all my love, Mary." I read the letter over and over, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to salvage what was left of our marriage. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, couldn't see how it was possible. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the coffee table, sitting back on the couch as I tried to process everything. I thought about all the times we had laughed together, all the moments we had shared, and how, despite everything, a part of me still loved her. But then I remembered the betrayal, the way she had looked at me when she told me what she had done, and the anger came rushing back. Could I forgive her? Could I let go of the pain and try to rebuild what we had lost? Or was it too late, the damage too great to ever be repaired? I didn't know the answer, and the uncertainty gnawed at me, keeping me awake long into the night. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this, caught between hope and despair, unable to move forward or let go. I needed to see her, to talk to her, to confront the reality of our situation, whatever that might be. I needed to know if there was anything left worth saving. With a heavy heart, I picked up the phone and called her. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice tentative, almost afraid. "Mark," she said softly. "It's me," I replied, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "We need to talk." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her holding her breath on the other end. "Okay," she finally said. "When?" "Tonight," I said, not giving myself time to second-guess the decision. "I'll come over after work." "Okay," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll be here." We hung up without saying anything more, the weight of what was to come pressing down on both of us. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, barely able to focus on anything, my thoughts consumed by the conversation we were about to have. That evening I drove to the small apartment she had rented after she left, my heart pounding in my chest the whole way. As I pulled into the parking lot, I sat in the car for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. Finally, with a deep breath, I got out and walked to her door. It opened almost as soon as I knocked, and there she was, standing before me, looking just as fragile and lost as she had the day she left. "Mark," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears the moment she saw me. "Mary," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. For a moment we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to say, the air between us heavy with everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, she stepped aside, and I walked in, feeling the weight of the decision I had to make pressing down on me with every step. This was it, the moment of truth, the moment that would decide whether we would find a way to rebuild our lives together or whether this would be the final chapter of our story. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in the small apartment that felt as foreign as the silence between us. Mary stood a few feet away, her hands wringing nervously in front of her, eyes flickering between hope and fear. The air was thick with tension, so palpable that it almost made it hard to breathe. I took in the surroundings, minimalistic and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to the home we'd built together. It struck me then just how separate our lives had become in such a short time. The life we had shared seemed distant, like something from a different era, a memory tainted by the choices we both made. "Do you want something to drink?" she offered, her voice breaking the silence, though it was barely above a whisper. "No, I'm fine," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral, though my emotions were anything but. I could see the tension in her posture, the way she struggled to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But there was nothing normal about this, nothing at all. We stood there awkwardly, neither of us knowing how to start. The words we needed to say were so monumental, so loaded, that it felt impossible to get them out. Finally, I took a deep breath and decided to plunge into the heart of the matter. "I got your letter," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Mary's eyes softened, a flicker of hope brightening her expression. "I didn't know if you would read it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was afraid you might just throw it away." "I read it," I confirmed, taking a step closer but still keeping my distance. "And it made me realize that we can't keep avoiding this. We need to talk about what happened, and we need to be honest with each other." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I've been going over it in my mind, over and over, trying to understand why I did what I did, trying to figure out how to make it right. But no matter how much I think about it, I still can't believe I hurt you like that." The raw emotion in her voice tugged at something deep inside me, but I forced myself to stay focused. "Why Mary?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since that night on the island. "Why did you do it? Why him?" She bit her lip, trying to find the words. "I don't know how to explain it," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I was so caught up in his story, in his pain, that I lost sight of everything else. It's like I wasn't thinking at all, like I was in a trance. I just wanted to help him, to give him some comfort in his last moments. But I went about it all wrong." "Comfort," I echoed, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "You thought betraying me was a way to comfort him." She shook her head vigorously, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, it wasn't about betraying you. It wasn't about you at all, and that's what makes it so awful. I wasn't thinking about us, about what it would do to you, to our marriage. I was only thinking about him, and that was my biggest mistake." I took another step forward, my eyes locked on hers. "And what about now?" I asked. "What are you thinking about now?" "Now," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "Now all I can think about is you, about how much I love you and how much I want to fix this, to fix us. I don't know if that's even possible, but I have to try. I can't lose you, Mark. I can't lose us." The sincerity in her voice, the raw emotion in her eyes, made my heart ache. But there was still so much anger, so much betrayal, that I didn't know if I could let it go. "I want to believe you," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I want to believe that we can find a way through this, but I don't know if I can. You broke something, Mary. You broke us, and I don't know if it can be put back together." She took a step closer, reaching out to me with trembling hands. "Mark, please," she begged. "I know I broke your trust, and I know that's not something that can be fixed overnight. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, to work as hard as I can to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with, that I'm still the woman who wants to spend the rest of her life with you." I felt her hands brush against mine, and for a moment, I almost pulled away. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, feeling the warmth of her touch, the familiar comfort of her presence, and it broke something inside me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I'm asking you to give me one more chance, to let me prove to you that I can be the wife you need me to be, that we can still have the life we dreamed of." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. I wanted to hate her, to hold on to my anger, to push her away and protect myself from the pain she had caused. But the truth was, I still loved her. Despite everything, I still loved her. But love wasn't always enough. Not after everything that had happened. When I opened my eyes, I saw her standing there, vulnerable and afraid, waiting for me to make a decision that would change both of our lives. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Mary," I began, my voice steady but filled with sadness, "I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know if we can ever get back to what we had, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if there's anything left to save." Her eyes filled with hope, and she squeezed my hands tightly, as if afraid I might slip away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mark. I promise you won't regret this." I nodded, though the doubt still lingered in my mind. "But we're going to have to take this slow," I warned. "I'm not ready to jump back into this like nothing happened. We need to rebuild piece by piece, and it's going to take time." "I understand," she said quickly, nodding. "Whatever it takes, I'm here for it. I'll do anything, Mark. I just want to be with you." We stood there for a long moment, the tension between us easing just slightly, replaced by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through the darkness. It wouldn't be easy. There would be days when the anger and pain would resurface, threatening to tear us apart again. But for now, we had taken the first step, and that was enough. As I held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against mine, I knew that the road ahead would be long and uncertain. But I also knew that I wasn't ready to let go, not yet. There was still something worth fighting for, even if it was just the chance to see if we could find our way back to each other. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversation and hesitant touches, as we began the slow, difficult process of healing the wounds we had inflicted on each other. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could come out of this stronger. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act, as Mary and I tried to navigate the fragile truce we had established. We didn't pretend that everything was fine, but we also didn't dwell on the past any more than we had to. Instead, we focused on taking small steps, rebuilding the foundation that had crumbled beneath us. We met in neutral places, cafes, parks, anywhere that wasn't haunted by memories of what we had lost. Our conversations were careful, avoiding the landmines that could set us back. But they were honest. We talked about the things that had gone wrong, the mistakes we had made, and what we needed to do to make things right. There were moments of awkwardness, moments when the weight of what had happened seemed too much to bear, but we pushed through, determined to give this a real chance. I found myself watching her closely during those times, looking for signs that she was genuinely committed to making this work. And she was. Mary threw herself into our reconciliation with a determination that surprised me. She listened when I talked, really listened, and she made an effort to be the person I needed her to be. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was a start. One evening, about a week after we had decided to try again, we found ourselves walking through a quiet park near her apartment. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. We walked in silence for a while, each lost in our thoughts, before Mary finally broke the silence. "Mark," she began hesitantly, "I know we've been taking things slow, but I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we talked about what we want for the future. What do you think?" I glanced at her, seeing the nervousness in her eyes, and realized she was afraid of what I might say. The truth was, I had been thinking about the future too, but it was still a murky, uncertain thing, full of possibilities I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "I've been thinking about it too," I admitted, my voice cautious. "But I don't want to rush into anything. We've made some progress, but we're not there yet. There's still a lot of trust that needs to be rebuilt." She nodded, her expression serious. "I know. I don't want to rush either, but I just need to know that we're moving forward, that we're both committed to this." I stopped walking, turning to face her. "Mary, I am committed, but I need to be honest with you, this is hard for me. Every time I think about what happened, it's like a punch to the gut. I want to move past it, I really do, but it's going to take time. I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we had." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I understand, Mark. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust. I just need you to know that I'm all in. I want to be with you. I want to make this work. I sighed, running a hand through my hair as I tried to gather my thoughts. I believe you, Mary, and I want to make this work too. But we need to be realistic. We can't just pretend that everything's okay now. We have to be honest about our feelings, even when it's hard. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. I promise, Mark. I'll be honest with you, and I'll listen when you need to talk. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Her touch was warm, reassuring, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. As we continued our walk, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, our favorite memories, the things we used to enjoy together, the little moments that had made our relationship special. It was bittersweet, remembering those times, but it also reminded me of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. By the time we reached her apartment, the tension between us had eased, replaced by a tentative sense of connection. We stood outside her door, the night air cool against our skin, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Do you want to come in?" she asked softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. It would have been easy to say yes, to let things move forward, but I wasn't sure if I was ready, and if I wasn't, rushing into it could set us back even further. "Not tonight," I said gently, seeing the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. "I think we should take it one step at a time." She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I understand. Thank you for being honest with me." I leaned in, brushing a soft kiss on her forehead, feeling the warmth of her skin against my lips. "We'll get there," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "We just need to take our time." As I walked away, I could feel her watching me, the unspoken words hanging in the air between us. I wanted to believe that we were on the right path, that we could rebuild what had been broken. But the doubts still lingered, and I knew that this was only the beginning of a long, difficult journey. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination. If we were going to make this work, I needed to be all in, just as Mary had promised to be. I needed to confront my own fears, my own anger, and figure out whether I could truly forgive her, and whether we could move forward together stronger than before. But I also knew that this wasn't something I could do alone. We needed help, guidance, someone who could help us navigate the pain and find a way through it. And as much as it pained me to admit it, I realized that we needed to go to couples therapy. That night I called Mary, and we talked about it. At first, she was hesitant, worried that therapy might dredge up more pain than we could handle. But in the end, she agreed. We both knew that if we were going to have any chance of rebuilding our relationship, we needed to face our issues head-on. And so, a few days later, we found ourselves sitting in the waiting room of a therapist's office, the silence between us filled with nervous anticipation. We had both agreed to this, but now that we were here, the reality of it was sinking in. We were about to lay everything bare, to expose the raw wounds that had been festering between us. When the therapist called us in, we exchanged a glance, one filled with both fear and hope, and followed her into the office. As we sat down on the couch, I took a deep breath, feeling Mary's hand slip into mine. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment that would determine whether we could find our way back to each other, or whether the damage was too deep to ever be repaired. The therapist's office was a small, warm space, designed to put us at ease, but nothing could take away the tension that gripped me as we sat there, waiting for the session to begin. The walls were lined with soft colors, and the air smelled faintly of lavender, but all I could focus on was the tight knot in my stomach and the weight of Mary's hand in mine. Dr. Thompson, our therapist, was a calm, soft-spoken woman in her 40s. She greeted us with a reassuring smile, as if she could see the turmoil beneath our composed exteriors. After a few pleasantries, She got straight to the point, her voice gentle but firm. Mark, Mary, I understand that you're both here because you want to work on your relationship, she began. But before we move forward, it's important to acknowledge the pain that has brought you here. Healing can't begin until we're honest about what we're dealing with. So let's start with that. Mark, can you tell me, in your own words, what has been the hardest part for you since all of this happened? I hesitated, glancing at Mary, who looked down, her grip tightening around my hand. This was it, the moment to lay everything bare, to confront the truth we had both been avoiding. The hardest part, I echoed, my voice strained. It's the betrayal. Knowing that the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, could just do something like that. It's like the ground beneath my feet was ripped away, and I'm still trying to find my footing. Dr. Thompson nodded, her expression empathetic. That's understandable, Mark. Betrayal is one of the most painful experiences we can go through, especially in a relationship as deep as a marriage. It shakes your sense of security, of trust. Have you been able to express these feelings to Mary before now? I shook my head. Not really. I mean, we've talked about it, but it's hard. Every time I think about it, I shut down. It's like I don't even know where to start. Dr. Thompson turned to Mary, who was visibly struggling to hold back tears. Mary, how do you feel hearing that from Mark? Mary's voice was small, trembling. I've known he's hurt, but hearing him say it like that, it just breaks my heart. I never wanted to hurt him, and I hate myself for what I did. But I can't change it, and that's what makes it so hard. I can't take it back, no matter how much I wish I could. Dr. Thompson leaned forward slightly, her tone gentle but probing. Mary, can you tell Mark why you did what you did? Not just the situation, but what was going on inside you at that time? Mary took a deep, shuddering breath. I've been trying